The villagers objected to my farm shop plan for the following reason.
3 years. That is how long West Oxfordshire District Council gave Jeremy Clarkson to prove the diddly squat farm shop was not going to destroy the Cotswolds. That clock started running in the summer of 2023, and this year it ran out. Here is what almost nobody outside a handful of planning solicitors actually knows. Clarkson did not lose this fight. He did not even really fight it. He did something far more interesting. He asked for extra time. In the spring of this year, his planning agent submitted a fresh application to the council. Not a new appeal, not a legal battle, a request to amend the existing conditions and extend the temporary consent a second time. And buried inside that application is a sentence that tells you everything about how this entire operation actually works. His representatives told the council that Season 5 was airing this year and that Season 6 had already been commissioned for the summer of 2027. Their argument was simple. The television show is still running. Therefore, the demand is still real. Therefore, the temporary permission should keep being temporary just for a bit longer. Think about that for a second. The single official reason Diddly Squat Farm Shop gets to keep operating a car park is the continued existence of a television program on Amazon Prime. Not footfall data, not economic impact studies, not community benefit reports. The show. If the show stopped, the argument stops with it. Now let us go back to why this deadline existed in the first place, because the history explains why what happened this year is not remotely surprising. Back in 2022, the council issued enforcement notices against the farm. The shop had grown far beyond its original permission. The restaurant and the lambing barn was serving hot food without consent. The car park spilling into neighboring fields had never been approved. Roads were jammed. Villagers were furious. The council did what councils do. They said stop. Clarkson appealed. The Planning Inspectorate looked at the whole mess and made a decision the planning lawyers still talk about today. The inspector ruled that most of what Clarkson had built could continue, but only for a limited period, 3 years. The restaurant was refused outright. That fight, for the most part, ended there. A burger van now sits where the restaurant used to be. But here is the detail that made this whole thing so unusual, and it is worth slowing down on, because it is genuinely rare in planning law. The inspector's reasoning was not really about hedgerows or traffic counts in the ordinary sense. It was about celebrity. Read that decision closely, and what it actually says is that the harm to the countryside had to be weighed against the economic and cultural benefit the site was generating. And that benefit existed specifically because a famous person was running it. An identical farm shop run by an anonymous farmer, generating the same footfall by some other means, would likely have been treated far more harshly. Here, the inspector effectively accepted that fame itself was a material planning consideration. That is an extraordinary thing for a planning inspector to put in writing. It sets a precedent that other rural business owners without a television deal simply cannot use, because they do not have millions of viewers manufacturing demand for them every week. And crucially, the inspector built in a safety valve for that logic. If the fame faded, the argument for keeping the development would fade with it. 3 years was the test. Would this turn out to be a passing television phenomenon or something durable? The council was handed a review point specifically so they would not be locked into a permanent arrangement based on a temporary wave of attention. 3 years later, the answer is obvious to anyone who's been paying attention. It was never temporary. Which brings us to this year's application. Clarkson's team made their case directly, and it leans on exactly the same celebrity logic the original decision was built on. They told the council that the situation the inspector was originally worried about, a temporary flash of fame around a show that might end, has not happened. Instead, the opposite happened. Series 5 landed. Series 6 is already locked in for next year. The demand did not fade. It grew. Their argument to the council was essentially this: you gave us 3 years to check whether people would stop coming once the novelty wore off. People have not stopped coming, so give us 3 more years to keep checking. As of the most recent public information, the council has not yet issued a decision. The application sits in the system, and until West Oxfordshire District Council rules on it, nobody, including Clarkson himself, knows for certain whether that car park keeps its consent. Now here is where you need to pay very close attention, because this is the part almost every article about Diddly Squat gets slightly wrong. The farm shop shop and its car park are not the business. They never were. They are the shop window. And shop windows can be boarded up without the shop behind them going bust. While this planning application has been sitting unresolved, look at what has actually been happening around it. In June, Diddley Squat hosted the Cereals event, one of the biggest dates in the entire British arable farming calendar. Over 25,000 visitors, 550 exhibitors. That is not a farm shop event. That is a national trade show choosing Clarkson's farm as its venue, a decision made by an industry body with zero interest in whether a council approves a car park extension. In the same window, Diddley Squat signed a 3-year branded partnership with a major garden centre chain to co-develop and sell gardening products, including a wine already previewed at the Chelsea Flower Show. That deal has nothing to do with the physical farm shop building. It is a licensing and retail arrangement that exists whether or not anyone can park a car in Chadlington. And earlier in the year, a major online supermarket signed an exclusivity agreement to sell Diddley Squat products nationwide. Shortbread biscuits, chutneys, jams, candles, all of it now available to anyone in the country with an internet connection, regardless of whether they ever set foot on the farm. Do you see the pattern forming here? Every single one of these moves takes the actual commercial value of Diddley Squat and moves it further away from the physical site the council actually controls. The council can only ever regulate a car park, a shed, and some picnic tables in a field in Oxfordshire. It cannot regulate a national retail partnership. It cannot regulate a licensing deal with a garden centre chain. It cannot regulate a trade show booking made by an industry body. And it certainly cannot touch Hawkstone Brewery. And this is the detail that matters more than almost anything else in this entire story. Hawkstone sits on separate land, under a separate planning permission, as an entirely separate legal entity from the farm shop. The barley comes from Diddley Squat and neighbouring farms, but the brewing operation itself has no dependency whatsoever on whether West Oxfordshire District Council approves a car park or a restaurant. Hawkstone posted sales of over £21 million last year, growth of well over 100%, and it did that while the farm shop's planning status sat in limbo the entire time. If the council refused every single application tomorrow and Diddley Squat farm shop closed its gates permanently, Hawkstone would not lose a single point of sale in Waitrose, Sainsbury's, or the 2,000 pubs already stocking it. The brewery was built, quite deliberately, to be planning-proof. Council refuses the extension outright, and Clarkson has to close the farm shop car park and restore the land. The actual empire barely notices. The shop was always the marketing department. The beer, the merchandise, the retail deals, the trade show hosting, that is the company. And the company does not need permission from West Oxfordshire District Council to keep growing. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle anyone who thinks planning enforcement is an effective tool against this kind of operation. The council believes it holds real leverage because it controls the physical site everyone associates with the brand. But the brand has quietly outgrown the site. Every refusal, every enforcement notice, every 3-year deadline just becomes free content for a television show that keeps getting recommissioned.